in pursuit of health and wisdom. Sapio with Buck Joffrey.
Welcome back to Sapio with Buck Joffrey. This is Buck Joffrey, and happy Thanksgiving to you. Hopefully you had a good one and didn't overdo it with the carbs, and of course I did. I know it's a funny thing when you generally eat clean, and then the next thing you know, you just like bombard yourself with carbohydrates, potatoes and stuffing and pie. I mean, gosh, it just knocked me out, man. And then the next day I tried to go work out. I just felt like toxic. I just couldn't do it. Like felt weak. So I just stopped and I said, you know what? I am just going to do some cardio today and I'll lift weights tomorrow because it doesn't feel like it's going to go well for me today. So again, hope you had a nice Thanksgiving. This week, what we're doing is we're actually going to play a show from Longevity Junkie, which you may or may not know is another podcast that I am a co-host on with Nikki Lee. It's a fun podcast in general, but this show is really, really cool. It is a show that where we interviewed one of the forefathers of the entire sort of longevity age reversal movement, a guy by the name of Aubrey de Grey. And if that rings a bell, it may be because he came up with this entire concept and actually coined the term Longevity Escape Velocity. Brilliant guy. So hope you enjoy the show. Check it out. But before we go there, I want to remind you, if you haven't gotten an email about this, that there's this course that I have, Longevity Roadmap, currently on sale, 20% off for this whole, Friday, Cyber Monday thing and all that. And it is 20% off right now, which also includes 3 months of biweekly personal coaching with me. It has been a real eye-opener for me as I've worked with a number of you now in the coaching part of this at, the level of under treatment or doctors just not looking at what potentially could be happening to you in the next 10 years rather than what's happening to you right now. Gross, in my opinion, from a longevity perspective, gross mismanagement. I'm just hopeful that more of you will come on board so that we can make sure that you're on the right track. So if you're interested, again, 20% off through Monday, Cyber Monday, which is today for you if this is launching Monday. And go to longevityroadmap.com. With that, I give you Aubrey de Grey.
Longevity Junkie is presented to you by our friends at Acast.
Hey, Longevity Junkie. It's time to get your fix. This is Buck Joffrey.
And I'm Nikki Lee, probably the original Longevity Junkie.
The original. The OG,
The OG.
Longevity Junkie.
Coming up, we're going to talk about longevity and health news. And we'll talk about Longevity Escape Velocity with the man who came up with it.
Aubrey de Grey. Yeah, Aubrey de Grey.
Also, as always, we'll give you a healthy takeout to try yourself. So, Buck, how have you been?
I've been good. I saw Chuck Norris in a movie with you on Instagram. And what's going on with that?
Yeah.
That is cool.
The coolest, honestly, because I grew up with my dad watching Walker, Texas Ranger.
Okay.
It was like our bonding time. Every Saturday night we'd watch Chuck Norris kick ass, and I didn't realize that I was manifesting this. Seriously, I texted my dad that. I was like, I didn't realize that we were like creating a future thing here. But yeah, I'm in a movie called Agent Recon. Chuck Norris, man, he's a legend.
Yeah, seriously.
Excited. It's his first action film in 11 years since Expendables 2.
Well.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? I had no idea.
I remember him most actually from, because when I was a kid, I used to watch those Bruce Lee movies. And he was in, I think it was Enter the Dragon or something like that. But it was super cool. I just remember him fighting. The biggest scene in that was at the very end when he was fighting Bruce Lee.
Oh, so
It's
Chuck's
like
in his
200 years
prime.
old. It's like 200 years old.
Oh, right? Longevity. Love it. Way to lock that in.
But how's Chuck doing? Is he looking good? I mean, how old is he? Is he like
I think he's like 82.
Oh my gosh.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually in this movie his son is actually also in it, which is really cool.
We got to get him on the show.
I mean, we'd be honored, right?
Yeah, seriously. Is he still able to kick and punch and all that?
Oh yeah,
stuff?
he does
Really?
his thing. Oh, for sure. I mean, I feel like we've been saying even on the show, like as long as you kind of keep up healthy habits and you keep up exercising or you keep up like things for maintenance, then it's not like you're going to be atrophying, right? Like your
I think that's
muscles.
a concept of health span, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the idea is, okay, maybe you haven't figured out how to live to 200 years, but that period of decline is a lot shorter,
Exactly.
so that, you're in your 80s, you're trekking along.
Yeah.
Still,
I mean, in his case, he's been kicking ass his whole life. So,
yeah.
I mean,
Exactly.
it's Chuck Norris.
I know.
I love all the little memes and things like that about like Chuck Norris, like Chuck Norris approved and like all these things.
Yeah, totally.
Cool.
Yeah, so that's cool.
Anything with you?
Of course not.
I love you so much. I love you so much. You
No.
know what? We gotta go do like a retreat or something like that for like longevity, and like literally I think it'd be really fun.
Yeah, no, definitely that'll be good.
Okay, it's time for our first segment. Have you heard? A new article published in Everyday Health states that global life expectancy may increase 4 to 5 years by 2050. It said life expectancy is projected to increase in the coming decades to a worldwide average of 80.5 years for women and 76 years for men. Better lifestyle choices now will help you not only live longer, but live longer in good health. How does this strike you?
It actually kind of reminds me, this type of article, of, so there was this jump from agrarian or farming societies to the Industrial Revolution, and there was this economist named Thomas Malthus, and it was 1798, wrote this essay essentially on the principles of population, and his big thing was, at this pace, we are going to, in the U.S., we're going to outgrow our food supply, and then we're going to basically turn on each other, and that kind of thing. And his stuff was based on real math, epidemiology or demographics or whatever. The problem is that he did not have any idea that the Industrial Revolution was coming. Farming equipment and tractors like that would make it a lot easier to make a lot more food. So to me, like, this article reminds me of that kind of thing where it's like, you know what? We're in the middle of a revolution right now, right?
Yeah,
to
we
me, the way that technology and longevity is moving is a lot more
rapid.
Yeah, a lot more rapid, and it's probably a lot more similar to what's gone with computing power.
Yeah.
And Moore's law and doubling the amount of
our advancements in a short amount of time.
Yeah, and all that kind of thing.
Sure.
So I think that that's really what this is. So in effect, for me, this kind of article is pretty much useless because I just don't think it's. I mean, it's based on
It doesn't sound like they are even understanding how much we're advancing.
Yeah.
But also, I want to say too. I don't know if you remember, but I mentioned that I reversed my biological age by 4 years when I did the telehealth. Remember, I told you about that from David Sinclair's little.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Okay.
Well, because I had taken, like, they do a cheek swab and you you send it to a lab, and you also answer some questions about like your daily habits or your health of, your food choices and things like that, and exercise and all these pillars of health that we talk about. And it gave me a year or two above my actual age at one point.
The first one you did.
The first one I did, yes. And then about I don't know if it was maybe, let's say 6 months later, I did another one, and then it was 3 years younger than what I actually was. So I mean, I had like a 4-year.
So did you do anything during that time differently?
Yes, I did. I did. I changed my diet completely.
Mhm.
And I had gone through a lot of different actual spiritual journeys and different mindsets. And we've talked about before, our mind power, really.
Mhm.
And I believe that, I feel healthier now. I do feel like my body has completely changed in so many different ways. And also, like, the diet was a big thing, and my exercise and my mental health, like all of these things actually changed dramatically. So it was really, so that's already like this 4 to 5 years by 2050. By 2050? What? No,
2050.
like that's ridiculous.
No, I'm going to be,
You know what I mean?
be 25 years old by then.
Exactly. I agree. Yeah, I'll stick to 25. Although I like my 30s.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I feel like I look better too.
Yeah.
I mean, I just feel more
Actually,
like,
I think that's probably true.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you post pictures of yourself and I think you look.
I feel like I like the way I look better now than I did, for sure.
Right, for sure. Great.
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
So it's great. So this article is bullshit.
Well, we just think it's
I think they're just
they're just not taking a lot of things into consideration that I think
I totally agree.
we'll call it Malthusian rubbish and leave it at that.
Rubbish.
So I'm gonna be
I love it. All right, well, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk with a pioneer of longevity, Aubrey de Grey. All right, welcome back, Longevity Junkies. Time for our guest interview. It's The Breakdown with Aubrey de Grey.
This is exciting because this is Dr. Aubrey de Grey. Now, Dr. de Grey, who we'll just call Aubrey right now, is he's really a pioneer, in my opinion, and I think a big thinker in the longevity space, and at times has been deemed a heretic and then redeemed himself as a hero, and he can talk to that a little bit. But he's a biomedical gerontologist. He's the author of multiple books, The Mitochondrial Free Radical Theory of Aging in 1999. He is the guy behind a phrase that is thrown around left and right now, which is Longevity Escape Velocity, and is founder of the Lev Foundation. And to boot, he's an amateur mathematician who happened to study a problem that no one had made progress on for the last 60 years. So, Aubrey de Grey, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Wow.
So I'm going to start off right now and, ask you this question that, I'm a physician in my background, and you are a computer scientist to start. You were a software guy and artificial intelligence. How did you end up studying the biology of aging?
Yeah, I switched fields, a long time ago now, but in my early 30s, late 20s, early 30s. Basically, the motivation was that when I was 26, and as you say, I was a perfectly self-respecting artificial intelligence researcher, I met and married a biologist. And she is a lot older than me. She was already a full professor in California at the time, and she was in England on sabbatical. And through her, first of all, of course, I just kind of learned a lot of biology over the dinner table by accident. But also, gradually, after a couple of years, I began to realize that we were never talking about aging. And the thing is, I'd always known since my earliest days, I can't pinpoint when, that aging was obviously number one. It was the number one most important problem for humanity, the thing that caused the most suffering and death and all that. And number two, it was something that was in principle solvable by medical intervention. So I had just completely assumed that everybody else thought this was just as obvious as I thought it was. And, and the biologists were getting on with it. And you didn't hear anything about progress to speak of, but, it was a hard problem, so that wasn't necessarily a thing. And I just never did the experiment of actually discussing it with anybody until then. And so when I found out that actually not only was nobody working on it, hardly anybody, but that the main reason was because people just didn't think about it that way, that was a reason to switch fields. And that happened, first of all, through my wife, who was, as I say, a biologist, and then through other biologists that I met through her. And then to, a wider audience, I discovered, everyone's basically just in this thing that I ended up calling the pro-aging trance, where they have kind of put it out of their minds in order to get on with their miserably short lives. And so I thought, well, that won't do. And I happened to be in a very convenient position to switch fields without significant risk. So that's what I did.
That's fascinating. So let me ask you a question in the sense that starting out as, I guess, more of a technical person than your typical biologist and involved with artificial intelligence, how do you view the problem of aging?
Yeah, I mean, you're asking it the right way, because I do view aging from the point of view of an engineer. I think, first of all, I take as my starting point the fact that the body is a machine. It's a really, really complicated machine, but it's still a machine, which means that its function is determined by its structure. And so that's an important starting point. Another thing to understand, of course, is that we haven't got the blueprint for the human body. There's a vast amount that we don't understand about how it works. But again, engineers reverse engineer machines that they didn't build and they don't have the plans for all the time. So again, that's not necessarily a showstopper. And so then we have to ask, okay, what is aging from the point of view of an engineer? And of course, the answer is aging is the accumulation of self-inflicted damage. Just in the same way that a car or an airplane will accumulate, rust in the course of its normal operation. Similarly, the human body accumulates various types of change to the molecular and cellular structure and composition of its various organs and tissues. And those changes are harmless for a long time simply because the body is set up to tolerate a certain amount of that change, in just the same way that, again, a car, works perfectly fine for a few years, even if you don't do anything about the accumulating rust. But eventually there's a point where the doors fall off. And similarly, in the human body, there's a point where physical and mental functions start to go downhill as a result of the damage having exceeded the amount that the body is set up to tolerate. That's all aging is.
Yeah. And, one of the things I think that you're saying, I think it's an important distinction, is people are always looking for external sources of damage to the body. And when you're talking about, damage, what we're really talking about here is the damage that is needed to run the organism in the first place, which makes it a bigger problem. It's not like you're just eliminating some pollution or some toxins that you can just run away from. These are the very elements that provide us the ability to live.
It's inevitable.
That's absolutely right. I'm reminded very strongly of a big campaign that was waged by an extremely distinguished biochemist who I was privileged to be good friends with, named Bruce Ames, 20-odd years ago. He had become famous in his youth, and so he was, a demigod of biochemistry and so on forever and ever. But he got into aging, and in particular, he was, consulted by government a lot, and to do with, recommendations for policy and so on. And there was a huge emphasis on elimination of, pesticides and stuff from agriculture and such, as if that was, a big deal in terms of the accumulation of, the progression of disease among the population. And he had this big campaign to get, policymakers to understand that actually, while, pesticides and other, external toxins are, definitely bad things, nevertheless, the actual impact that they have, the magnitude of the impact they have on human health is trivial. It's rounding error when compared to the impact from internal sources, which, of course, is also suboptimal in many cases through as a result of lack of micronutrients, for example.
One of the things that I think is interesting about your approach and going back and watching talks of yours, even from 20 years ago, is that the approach has been, I think, something very different. Whereas that I think a lot more people are coming around to now, which is you were talking about not age slowing. You're not talking about slowing age, but you've been talking about reversing age for some 20 years. And I think your point being that it's actually not like, it's not on a continuum. That research is not on a continuum where you can slow and then your research gets to a point where all of a sudden you can reverse, but they're actually two different things. And that going down the reversal route is more efficient and effective. Can you elaborate? First of all, am I right about that? Maybe you could elaborate on it.
Sure, you're absolutely right. And you're also right to say that that was the big paradigm shift that I brought about, and the big reason why, for the best part of a decade, most of my colleagues in the field just couldn't understand a word that I was saying and just couldn't really get their heads around whether I was even being scientific. Yeah, I mean, the idea, this is what happens when you don't think about aging like an engineer. People would think, okay, well, different organisms age at different rates. There are various things we can do, like calorie restriction in laboratory organisms that vary that age. So that's all very interesting, and maybe we can develop interventions that will do better. But absolutely, the unstated but very deep-seated assumption in the field was that any talk of reversing aging was premature because it was kind of obviously harder than slowing aging down. And the thing that was being overlooked, of course, was that when we talk about reversing aging, we're not actually talking about reversing the process by which damage is created. In the same way, when we have rust on a car, we don't look at the idea of actually reversing the chemical reaction. No, instead, what we're looking at is restoring the body to a state where it contains less damage by repairing the damage. And the repair of the damage is something that doesn't have anything to do with the process by which the damage was created. But then we have the next step, of course, is to ask, well, okay, it's a different process, repair, it's different from reversing. And that sounds promising, but is it actually easier? And then one has to dig into the details, of course, and ask, what is the damage? Can we describe these various types of molecular and cellular change that eventually cause health problems late in life? And then, what are the available technologies that might be, foreseeable to eliminate that damage? And that's what I did back in, as you say, year 2000.
So what would be an example of a process in the body physiologically that is causing damage, and let's say a proposed mechanism of restoring or getting rid of, replacing that issue with the rust?
Right. So, oxidative stress, the creation of free radicals as a byproduct of respiration, causes changes to various macromolecules, including DNA and proteins and lipids. And sometimes those reactions make cells unhappy, and sometimes those cells will die as a result. Now, in general, when cells die, they are replaced by the division of other cells. But of course, there are some exceptions. Cardiomyocytes, the heart muscle cells, are typically not replaced. Instead, when a cardiomyocyte dies, the space that it used to contain is replaced essentially by fibrotic material. Similarly, in the brain, neurons die, they don't get replaced. And if we take the most conspicuous example, Parkinson's disease, there you've got, a particular type of neuron, the dopaminergic neuron, dying at an unusually rapid rate, incidentally just because what dopaminergic neurons do, the creation of dopamine, happens to be a highly oxidative process that creates a lot of free radicals, and so they damage themselves more rapidly than what your average neuron does. Anyway, so yeah, we all end up in old age with having maybe lost 20 or 30% of our dopaminergic neurons that we had when we were young. Some people, of course, lose them a bit faster. And if you're one of those unlucky people who lose maybe 70 or 80% by the time you get to be in old age, then you have Parkinson's disease. So that's a type of damage. It's a change in the structure, namely a change in the number of a particular type of cell, in this case, a depletion of cells that we want. You can, of course, have also, having an overabundance of cells that we don't want, like senescent cells, but that's a different category. So what do we do about this? Of course, what we do is stem cell therapy. We put the cells back into the substantia nigra, or actually the way it's being done is into the putamen, which is where the dopamine is needed. You put in cells that are of the right kind. They are dopaminergic precursors that will divide and differentiate to replace the neurons that the body was not replacing on its own. And so you're back where you started in terms of the structure, and therefore you're also back where you started in terms of function. Sure enough, it works spectacularly. The first time this was done was 30 years ago or more, when a group in Sweden tried this. They didn't know anything to speak of about how to manipulate stem cells in the laboratory so as to make sure they were injecting the right kind of cell. So it was extremely hit and miss. They took their cells from aborted fetuses. And sure enough, most of the time it didn't work at all because they didn't get the right kind of cell. But when it did work, it was like no Parkinson's symptoms at all for more than a decade, even in the absence of any other therapy like L-DOPA. So, spectacular. And now that we do know how to manipulate stem cells, people are very gung-ho, and there's a bunch of clinical trials going on. The one that's furthest along is in Japan, but there's a couple in the US as well. So, yeah, this is an example.
So you coined this term, longevity escape velocity, some years ago, and now it's being used everywhere. They're not giving you credit, Aubrey. But I'd love for you to describe it in your own words, which is, I think your example right there is a good one, but maybe you can walk us through, for somebody who's never heard of this concept, what exactly longevity escape velocity is.
Yeah, sure. And to be honest, I do get some credit for it. But anyway, I get quite enough praise as it is. I'm perfectly happy with that. The thing about longevity escape velocity is it arises from the fact that we're talking about damage repair, rejuvenation. Because if you take someone who's, let's say, 60 years old, an average 60-year-old, they're, a few years away from starting to go downhill in terms of function as a result of the damage they accumulate. They've already got most of the damage that would be required to make them sick. So then, supposing we have developed some damage repair interventions that jointly are able to repair, let's say, half of that damage that's in the body. The reason why it wouldn't repair all the damage is because some damage is simply more difficult to repair than others. And therefore, you're going to have a progression of sophistication, a progression of efficacy of these various treatments. All right, so you can rejuvenate someone who's biologically 60 back to being, let's say, biologically 30 or 40. Now, that means that they're going to carry on aging. They're going to carry on with their metabolism generating more damage. And that damage is going to accumulate. And some of it's going to be amenable to further removal by subsequent applications of the therapies, but some of it won't, because, as I say, it's too difficult. In other words, the therapies simply don't repair those types of damage. So what's going to happen, therefore, is even if the beneficiary of all of this is getting these therapies as often as they want, they're still going to eventually get sick because of the difficult damage accumulating to a point where, on its own, even in the absence of the easy damage, there's more of it than what the body's set up to tolerate. But the thing is, that's going to take time. It's going to take 20 or 30 years. And in those 20 or 30 years, people like me, the researchers, are going to be beavering away trying to improve the therapies. In other words, trying to address the difficult damage. And 20-odd years in the future, of course, we're going to have had some success in that. We won't be able to fix all the difficult damage, but some of it will have shifted into the easy category, if you like. And therefore, when someone who's, let's say, 90 and they're biologically 60 for the second time, having had this first-generation therapy for a while, right? When they come in and they want to be re-rejuvenated, we will be able to re-rejuvenate them because we'll have Sense 2.0, right? Damage repair 2.0. And so we'll be able to give them another 30 or 50 years or whatever, and so on. So in other words, there is this concept, which I like to call longevity escape velocity, as you say, which is simply it's the minimum rate at which researchers are going to need to continue to improve the comprehensiveness of damage repair therapies in order that the residual damage that they still can't repair will not be enough to make someone sick, even though they've had a long time to accumulate it. And it's not very fast. I mean, now it is, but once we get to a threshold point of, as I say, getting maybe 20 or 30 years of postponement of the health problems of late life, then we're done. Definitely we're done. There's absolutely no way that we will fail to get the next 20 years within those 20 years and to keep going along those lines. So yeah, that's what I call my new foundation, LEV Foundation, and here we are.
Do you see the pace of this research? We were talking about this earlier in the context of a paper that we were looking at just for fun. But I said that to me, it seems like this research in the longevity space is starting to look more like computer power, where it's more of a Moore's law type thing, where it's accelerating very quickly. Do you think that that's true, just because of the money and the interest coming into this space?
It's actually better than that. Yes, the money is going up exponentially. The amount of progress we have to make per year or per decade actually goes down with time. Residual, ultra-difficult damage that we still can't fix takes longer and longer to reach the point where it's bad for you. A friend of mine, Paul Hynek, a long time ago, coined the word the Methuselarity by analogy with the singularity, and basically exploring exactly the question you asked. And it's a very good word, but there are these differences. I actually wrote an entire article on the similarities and differences between the two.
How far away do you think we are from longevity escape velocity?
I said 20 years ago that I thought there was a 50% chance that we would get there within 25 years. In my defense, I did actually also say, subject to funding, I was very much expecting that funding for the early stage research that I focused on would be more forthcoming, but it wasn't. And the result was that after the first 10 years, by, let's say, 2014, not a lot had happened, to be honest. And I was still saying, between 20 and 25 years for that 50% probability of reaching LEV, reaching the Methuselarity. And so that was quite disappointing. But then the better news is that in the second period, the last 10 years, from 2014 or so until now, the timeframes have basically hardly slipped at all. That's partly because there has indeed been more money, though I have to say the money is very unevenly distributed, and we can talk more about that if you like. A lot of it is simply because progress begets progress. And, we've been able to get momentum. There's more and more people in the field. There's more and more belief that we can make progress in damage repair. And sure enough, that belief is turning into actual advances in the laboratory. So now, my 50-50 prediction is 12 to 15 years from now, so the second half of next decade.
Oh, wow. And back in 2005, correct me if I'm wrong, you were accurate in your prediction of reversing age in mice?
No. So,
Yeah.
So when I coined the term longevity escape velocity, I was at pains to point out that, unlike most things in medicine, longevity escape velocity is going to be much easier to achieve in long-lived species like humans than it is in short-lived species like mice, simply because, you've got more time to make the next advance, right? So I don't honestly think we'll ever achieve LEV in mice. Cats and dogs, it's, marginal. Maybe we might do it.
David Sinclair says he's already done it, though, didn't he? Or you?
We'll come to that.
I'm so excited now.
So I thought, well, okay, we need a kind of surrogate, a kind of weaker threshold milestone for mice that will be exciting, but won't be LEV. And I basically kind of thing called robust mouse rejuvenation, RMR. And I said, basically, what we've got to do is we've got to take a bunch of mice. They've got to be healthy mice. In other words, they've got to be from a strain that doesn't have any congenital difficulties or anything like that. So they'll typically live maybe 2.5, 3 years on average. And then we've got to add a lot to that. I said back then, 20 years ago, that we should be aiming to add 2 whole years to that. And here's the kicker. The idea would be to add those extra years with interventions that are initiated only when the mice are already in middle age. Over time, I have actually softened my definition of RMR. I have said that actually it might be okay if we only get 1 year of additional life. And the reason I've said that is simply because of the goal of RMR. The goal here is mostly rhetorical. Well, it's also scientific, but huge amount is rhetorical. In other words, the idea is to have results that are sufficiently impressive to give my colleagues in the field the feeling that they've got permission to say the kind of things that I've been saying all the time.
So back to the Sinclair age reversal issue. You said he has not done that.
So David and I, as I say, we're great friends. We've known each other well for 20 years. And we have a lot of things in common. Like, we're very iconoclastic. We don't suffer fools gladly. But there are ways in which we are polar opposites as well. And one of them is that I don't have an entrepreneurial bone in my body, whereas he's very entrepreneurial. And, entrepreneurial activities essentially hype goes with the territory. You've kind of got to overstate things in order to get people's attention. And, of course, people accuse me of overstating things by talking about 1,000-year lifespans and so on, even though actually I've got perfectly good logic that underpins it. Yeah, I mean, he's actually, taken a lot of flack over the past year or so, especially for overstating things. And, I can see both sides, but at the same time, I wouldn't want to be in David's position.
All right. Well, so has the first person to live to, say, 200 or even 1,000 years been born yet?
Very probably, in my view. Of course, we don't know because, as I say, we've got to reach the Methuselarity, right? And I can only give a 50% probability. I think that we've got a 50% chance of getting there within the next 12 to 15 years, but there's at least a 10% chance that we won't get there for 100 years, which would certainly mean that no, the first person to reach 200 or even 150 has probably not been born yet. However, the point about the Methuselarity and the whole longevity escape velocity concept is that there will basically be no period of time, no cohort whose average lifespan is 200. We will go from living basically only a few years longer than we do today to living essentially indefinitely, more or less overnight. It will be an absolutely very, very rapid phase transition. So if we get there within 12 to 15 years, then that means not only that the first person to reach 1,000, barring, asteroid impacts and so on, has been born, it means that they're probably in their 50s or 60s.
Do you think that at some point, chronological age is going to be irrelevant?
Oh, for sure. I mean, the whole point of preventative maintenance is that how long ago you were built doesn't matter anymore. So, I keep talking about cars. Some people think it's an oversimplistic analogy, but it really isn't. If you'd asked someone 100 years ago who built such a car whether those cars would last 50 years, they'd have said, of course not, they'd have lasted a year. But of course, we got pretty good at preventative maintenance for cars because they're nice, simple man-made machines. And sure enough, cars started to get out to 50 years, even when they were designed to last only 10 or 15 years. And those cars were working just as well as when they were built. And sure enough, those same cars, 50 years on from there, when they're 100 years old, are still working just as well because the preventative maintenance is comprehensive. And so again, that if you ask someone now who owns a vintage car, whether their car is going to be around in another 100 years, they'll say, well, sure, why not? So absolutely, chronological age will be completely irrelevant.
Well, when that becomes irrelevant, what do you think that world will look like? What do you think a 1,000-year-old person would look like?
Dust.
Like dust, yeah. Dust with two eyes or a raisin or...
And we all know that the future holds a lot of surprises, even in the near term. Like, 50 years ago, who would have predicted the internet or, cell phones or whatever? So, I think it's crazy to form opinions or predictions about anything, even as much as 50 years into the future, let alone a long way into the future. And remember, we're not going to have any 1,000-year-old people for at least another 900 years, whatever happens. And a lot happens in 900 years.
A lot happens in a day.
So, going back to your engineer background, and obviously you were in artificial intelligence, before artificial intelligence became sort of a big buzzword like now too. How do you think AI changes the game?
Okay, so first of all, I want to emphasize that my time in AI research doesn't help me at all in answering that question. And the reason it doesn't is because during that period, the technology that has led to these spectacular advances over the past decade or so was completely out of fashion. There were like 3 labs in the world that were working on what we now call neural nets. In terms of the potential for AI of today's form to help, well, it's helping a great deal already, no question. The most conspicuous ways in which it's helping so far are not restricted to the biology of aging. They are relevant to medical research overall. So the single most conspicuous one, obviously, is AlphaFold, which is a program that can determine the 3-dimensional shape of a protein from its amino acid sequence. This is a problem that had been around for a very long time, decades, because everybody knew that if you could do this, then drug discovery in general would be enormously accelerated. And bang, here we are, we've got it. So that's just one example. It's the most conspicuous one, but things like that are happening all the time in more niche areas typically. And it's making a huge difference. So some of the most successful companies in this space that have arisen over the past decade or so are absolutely riding on that technology. In silico medicine, which is run by a great friend of mine, Alex Voronkov, it's called in silico medicine for a reason. There's another company, BioAge, again, run by a great friend of mine, Kristen Fortney, who, did her PhD and postdoc in bioinformatics. And originally BioAge was, again, basically an in silico company. It did well enough that it was able to broaden into now developing its own drugs and so on. So these are just two highlights within the field. It's going to be more and more important.
I want to bring us back really quick to you were talking about preventative maintenance, and I want to know if you have some advice on that for people, and as well, do you do any preventative maintenance in your own daily life?
It remains the case, and it will remain the case for another few years, I believe, that there's nothing we can do right now that we couldn't do 30 years ago. In other words, basically, so long as you behave and live the way your mother told you to, you're going to be doing about as well as you can do. All of the things that we can do that may improve on that will only improve on it very slightly. And worse than that, because these things are what I like to call messing with metabolism, they are things that go in and alter aspects of the way that the body works. Because of that, they're very, very personalized. In other words, different things work for different people. Some things that may be good for a lot of people may not be so good for other people. When it comes to me, the situation is even stronger because I happen to be lucky. One way in which I was lucky was that shortly after I started becoming prominent, I started getting speaking invitations that I would often be offered an honorarium for, and I would sometimes forego the honorarium in return for getting really high-end tests of my biological age. This was before this thing called epigenetic age had been invented. Anyway, so I've had that done, half a dozen times over the years, and I always come out way younger than my chronological age. Which means, of course, for me, the appropriate thing to do, the rational thing to do, is to be quite conservative and say, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And so that even if there's something that one might say has been well proven to be somewhat beneficial for most people, it probably wouldn't be a good idea for me to take it because
you're already doing amazing.
So, for example, if you don't exercise, then just don't don't exercising, right?
So I actually don't exercise. I mean, I don't.
Oh my God.
I don't do any exercise for the sake of exercising. I carry a heavy laptop bag around the world, but that's about it. And I have a BMI under 20. I have I have very good body composition and so on. So and extremely good insulin sensitivity. So basically, I'm just one of those repulsively lucky people who can get away with it.
So in the biohacking world, we're hearing about all of these, what we would, I guess, call the preventative interventions, I guess, like with the cold plunges and the red light therapies and all these things that people are like, oh, you got to do all this or daily maintenance. Are there any that actually look promising to you or that you do believe in that people should maybe try?
Well, so let me come back again to what I said about personalization. If you've got a lot of resources, then the right way to optimize what you're doing, to basically do what Brian Johnson is doing. In other words, essentially to be willing to throw a lot of money at the problem and to throw most of that money at measurement, determining what works for you and what doesn't. And that is, the reason why Brian has gravitated to the lifestyle he has, which involves, a very carefully designed diet. And it also, very, very importantly, involves keeping extraordinarily rigid control of his sleep patterns. This is something that really seems to matter for him. But I think it would be dangerous to say that it matters equally well for everybody. This is what one has to do. Now, of course, he spends $2 million a year on all of this. If you've only got a couple of, maybe 10 or 20,000 per year that you can afford to spend on this, then there's a lot less that you can do, but you can probably get most of the benefits, to be honest. And Brian knows this, of course, and he's worked very hard to publicize the way that he's gone about optimizing his own regime and the way that other people might do the same.
Well, you know, what he's saying is almost exactly what you were talking about before we got online, which is you took one of the Sinclair biological tests, and then you change your diet, you get tested again, biological age went down by 4 years. I mean, that's so effectively the same kind of thing he's talking about right now. So,
but do you do anything at all that you would say contribute to
or
your
not
luck?
do anything?
Or
I guess,
not?
like, you know,
right.
Well,
Are you not stressed at all?
For me, the thing that I'm doing that's most important is hastening the arrival of the Methuselarity. You know, because at the end of the day, that's what's going to that's what's going to determine how long I live and how long I stay healthy, is whether new technology comes along soon enough for me. And of course, I'm not only interested in myself, I'm interested in the 100,000 people a day that die of this problem. That means that, you know, every single day that I can bring forward the defeat of aging by my work, which I'm hoping I'm probably doing maybe once a month, you know, I'm saving 100,000 lives, which is 30 World Trade Centers. You know, it's quite easy to get out of bed for that.
I mean, that's pretty amazing. And also, a lot of people are like trying to find purpose all the time. And you seem to have an extreme purpose, which is, I feel, also, you know, feeds the will to live. And I feel like that's kind of where you're at.
Well, yeah, again, you know, I'm just incredibly lucky that way, that I've been able to gravitate into a field where, and rise to the pinnacle of that field that I view as the most important field in the world. And that I'm actually achieving, to some extent, what I set out to achieve. It's, you know, very few people are that lucky.
Exactly.
So, on another note, there's all sorts of other issues that come up if you're going to live to 1,000, right? So I'm curious, sort of, have you thought about, you know, I'm in the personal finance space, planning for retirement, pension plans the government has.
Yeah, okay, so let's talk about that one.
Yeah.
Because it's one that comes up a lot, and it's one of the most idiotic ones. Because the fact is, we all know that the entire economy is going to be completely rebuilt from the ground up in the next decade or two as a result of the rise of automation, and thus the complete impossibility of an economy based on anything like full employment. You know, in the 19th century, when the Industrial Revolution happened, we got away with it by inventing this whole new thing called the service sector, and thereby perpetuating some semblance of full employment. But, you know, when the service sector is also completely automated, you know, what have you got? You know, how many people do you need in the entertainment industry? So, you know, this completely destroys any questions about, you know, how will we perpetuate the current structure around pensions and retirement and so on, because it's just going to be a completely different thing.
So should we or should we not invest in stocks?
She's looking for investment advice.
Yeah, should we or should we not?
What about insurance companies? What do they do? Life insurance and all that kind of thing. I'm sure you've had to you've thought about this.
Well, so I have this prediction, as we've discussed, that we have a good chance of getting to longevity escape velocity within the next 12 or 15 years. And quite often I get invited to speak to pension funds and banks and insurance companies and so on. And, you know, they want to know the basis for this. They want to know whether they should believe me. And the talks I give tend to focus on a rather nearer transition. The titles of talks I give to those kinds of groups tend to be something like Anticipate the Anticipation. And what I mean by that is that even though it's more than a decade or so before we can get to longevity escape velocity itself, what matters from the point of view of a business that sells a product whose attractiveness depends on how long the customer expects to live, right? People who sell that kind of product, they don't need to know how long people are actually going to live. They need to know how long people are going to expect to live in the near future. And I believe that when we get to this robust mass rejuvenation point that I've spoken about, which, as I say, is a lot closer, could be as little as 3 or 4 years from now, then the world is going to suddenly abandon this pro-aging trance and this fixation on stupid questions about pensions and so on. People are going to expect that the war is going to be won in time for them. So people are going to expect to live a lot longer, whereas now they expect to live only a few years longer than their parents did. And that means they're going to want very, very different, pension plans and health insurance packages and life insurance packages, and nobody's ready. So I say to these people, these companies, I say, listen, that's what you've got to anticipate. You've got to be working now so that when this very, very rapid transition in expectations happens in society, you've got a new portfolio of products to roll out. Because if you don't, you're going to go bankrupt because your competitors will.
Tell us a little bit about the LEV Foundation.
So basically, we are continuing the work that I've done at my previous organizations, the Cellular Foundation and Sense Research Foundation. But our main focus at LEV Foundation is on the final step of this early stage preclinical laboratory work. The first phase is develop the components, and the second phase is put them together and see what happens. So we're doing pretty well with the first phase. At Sense Research Foundation, my focus was always on the most difficult types of damage, the ones that other people were basically not working on because they were too difficult to be compatible with the incentive structures in academia or in industry. But the point is the ones that are easier were being worked on by other people and have, seen a substantial amount of progress now. So you can take middle-aged mice, healthy mice, and, give them this or that intervention, stem cells or certain gene therapies or whatever, and they will live a bit longer, even if you only start giving them these things in middle age, as I say. So the question then is, what happens if you give the same mice a whole bunch of these things at the same time? And nobody's been doing that kind of experiment, even though everyone does know that it's the right kind of experiment to be doing now. Essentially, again, it's an incentive structure thing. You don't get papers in Science and Nature that way. You don't get, new intellectual property that way. So it falls to me, basically, as the leader of an organization that's funded by philanthropy. And so that's what we're doing. We are currently doing an experiment that started a year and a bit ago with 1,000 mice, giving them combinations of 4 different interventions, starting at 19 months of age. These are mice that normally live on average to about 31 months of age, so they had a year to go, and we're hoping to double that. We don't think we will double it this time, but we do think we're going to do substantially better than the best that's ever been done before. We are, as I say, most of the way through the experiment at this point. It's looking pretty good. I need to persuade a lot of people to write big checks. And of course, it would equally work for a very large number of people to write small checks, so every penny counts. Every dollar counts.
Well, hopefully we've got people listening who've got big checkbooks.
Yeah, right.
And thank you so much for being with us. This has been fantastic, and I really do appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for your time. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with our healthy takeout. All right, welcome back to Longevity Junkie, and it is time for our healthy takeout.
What'd you think?
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, honestly, that was an incredible interview.
Because I know, before we were talking, you were like, you were looking at some of the points, and we're, not really sure if you were going to enjoy this or not.
Right.
But
I really wasn't. And honestly, I mean, I am a huge researcher on my free time. And so, when we know the guest is coming up, I want to go and research this person and try and figure out, okay, what can we talk about more, or what resonates with me. And his interviews with so many different people had been so long. And honestly, I mean, I understood it to a point, but only to that point. Yeah. And so I was just kind of like, gosh, I don't know how this interview is going to go, but this was incredible. And I felt like I really understood. And also in my research of listening to so many other interviews, they were all the same. And this one was so different.
That's because we're better at interviewing.
Go us, honestly.
So it's interesting too is a few things that you mentioned just about benefactors and stuff. One of his large benefactors was actually Vitalik Buterin, the Ethereum founder. The crypto guys. Yeah. So.
Oh wow.
So hopefully, if there's a big crypto boom.
Yeah. Get it. Yeah.
Dump a bunch of money back.
They'll write some checks for sure.
But yeah, cool stuff. And
you loved it? I know you were already really excited about him.
Oh, I was just anxious. I wanted to make sure it wasn't too wonky for everybody because I like to get super wonky and stuff like that. But he was totally I think he gave us a lot of great nuggets.
He really did.
Yeah. So I would say a couple things. I mean, one thing, I wouldn't let. I mean, it was a phenomenal talk, but one thing that we need to remember is I think every year counts for us.
Yeah,
I think in the sense that Aubrey, I think, is looking at things at a magnitude differently than most people. So,
True.
You were asking questions about things that, maybe that make a difference with saunas and that kind of thing. We know that there's data that will decrease Alzheimer's and cardiovascular mortality over time. So those kinds of things may add, 5 years or something like that. He's looking at 500 years at a time.
Right.
So he's looking at those things and saying, oh, that's, that's probably not worth my time right now.
Yeah,
And
that's
for
true.
him, probably it's not. Let him focus on what he needs to focus on, right?
Keep going because we're going to all benefit.
Yeah, but but those types of things are important.
Very true.
Especially if you're considering this longevity escape velocity, if it's 10 to 12 years from now, somebody who can make it an extra, 6-7 years because they're doing the little things right is going to benefit from them. So that's part of it.
No, that's very true.
And to your point too, like I think just going back to your question about, what can you do? He did say something that I think is really important, which is measure, measure. And that is so important, and that not everything is going to work for everybody.
I know, it's so true.
I mean, you literally, what would have happened in your case, for example, is if you did one of these aging tests, you changed your diet, and you came out 10 years older.
Oh my gosh, I would have been devastated and depressed and signing up for therapy.
Well, and beyond that, you would be like, a diet doesn't work for me.
Right. Yeah. I would know to immediately, change what I'm doing for sure.
So test. Not everything is going to be good for everybody. And I think that's an important one, and testing is a big part of that.
Yeah. We don't need to drop $2 million like Brian Johnson, but at least.
Yeah, seriously.
But definitely invest in that measurement. And it's so funny because last night I was talking about my diet to the woman who taught me it, and she was like, well, what's your food log? Like, so I can actually see what's going on. And I was like, no, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't because
I'm a normal person and I don't log everything I eat.
But I was for a while, until I felt like I had the principles grasped. And she's like, well, I can't really I can't really help you if I don't really know, exactly the measurements of what you're eating. So just to her point, and to the fact that I was reminded that measuring is a big thing yesterday, and now Aubrey reminds me again that measure. So there's a sign for me about measuring, I guess.
And and then I guess I think we already mentioned this, but not all things are good for all people, and so
that is true, but kind of crazy for people. Like, I feel like it's a hard concept for people to grasp, right? Because we'll always hear our friends talking like, oh, I'm doing this and this is amazing, and then you get so excited about their enthusiasm because if it's working for them, then people will take it on as their own, okay, I got to do this because, Lisa's doing that or whatever's going on. And and it's really interesting though.
That's where the monitoring stuff comes in too. Like if you're, we'll do we'll this is an entirely different topic, but the whole concept of what Peter Attia calls medicine 3.0 and includes a lot of testing on yourself all the time with, like, say, continuous glucose monitors. That's a good one, by the way, because people have very, very different responses, even though,
to foods.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
One little food can spike something and you're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. But people should really understand that.
Because you can have, I've done that periodically. And what I found is, certain things spike my blood sugar that I would have never expected.
Oh, do you have an example? Do you remember?
Yeah, like Thai food. Thai food, it'll go crazy.
Well, the curry. So.
Well, here's a good example of that though, and this I think so dessert in general. Like if I had it, of course you're gonna spike,
sugar.
But not if I have it like right after dinner. Then I actually don't spike at all.
I think it's probably because of like the fiber and stuff that you had before.
Well, I always think about it as like this is so like,
Cushion, right?
well, if you've got a bunch of food moving through your intestines, like, there's like a wall of absorption there. And if you're filling half of it up with, or like 3/4 of it up with salad and stuff like that, then maybe, you sneak that dessert
cushion.
by
Yeah, 100%.
Right.
No, I actually remember seeing certain graphs about people when they would eat bread at a certain point of their meal, and how there was, sometimes it would with a certain
it's served at exactly the wrong time in restaurants.
Yeah.
Right at the beginning.
This is actually very true. Yeah, because you're like, you have none of that protective barrier, like we're saying, once you eat, then you have the absorption. Yeah, it's true. Actually, people wait on your bread. But I think having these certain tests, like finding out different tests, and like for me personally, I was grateful to have done the Tally Health test, which is a test by David Sinclair.
Who's lying about his mice?
He's like, I think he's taking a lot of flack recently, because I've been hearing his name, as you have too, with like all these professionals that we talk to.
Right.
And that's really interesting. I used to do his like I used to do his like supplements, but interesting. I did the supplements, and then I took the first test, and that had, it's not the only reason, but that was the age that was more than my biological age. And to be honest, when I switched my diet, I stopped taking his supplements completely for like a few months, and my age went down.
So you never know.
That's interesting.
And then the other issue with the test itself is, what's the accuracy? Is it plus minus 5 years? You know what I mean?
Right,
like
right.
Even within a test, if you took 5 tests in that same day, would those tests all show the same age, or would they come out differently because of some sampling error?
Yeah.
So phenomenal show. Nikki, why don't you read us out?
All right, we'll do.
Longevity Junkie is created by Dr. Buck Joffrey, MD, and Timothy Fonara. It is executive produced by myself, Nikki Lee, Buck Joffrey, and Timothy Fonara. The show is produced by Pretty Fast, and Phil Ferragamo is our producer, and original music by Alloy Track. We're distributed by our friends at Acast, and see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Sapio with Buck Joffrey. A quick reminder that while I am, in fact, a surgeon, nothing I say should be construed as medical advice. Now, make sure to include your physician in any medical decisions you make. And also, if you're enjoying the show, please make sure to show your support with a like, share, or subscribe. Until next time, this is Buck Joffrey for Sapio with Buck Joffrey.